I now will recognize Congressman Tom McClintock, who represents this district, for any opening statement that he may wish to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the committee for holding this hearing today in Yosemite National Park, and welcome all of you to the hearing as well. The Yosemite Grant of 1864 was the first time that federal land was set aside for the enjoyment of the American people. In the words of the act, this was done, quote, upon the express conditions that the premises shall be held for public use, resort, and recreation, and shall be inalienable for all time. This set in motion the events that ultimately led to the creation of the National Park Service, again with the express purpose to, quote, conserve the scenery and the natural and historical objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same. And I want to recognize the National Park Rangers who have ever since welcomed and encouraged succeeding generations of Americans who come to visit and enjoy their public lands. I might also add that this park is absolutely vital to the communities that surround it, whose economies depend upon the tourism that it generates, and that rely on the federal government to be a good neighbor in preserving, maintaining, and managing these lands. As we look at the fire-scarred landscape of the past decade, it's becoming obvious we are not meeting our responsibility to properly manage these lands. You know, an untended forest is no different than an untended garden. It's going to grow and grow until it chokes itself to death, and then it will succumb to disease, pestilence, drought, and ultimately catastrophic fire. This is how nature gardens. And she's a lousy gardener. If you doubt that, just leave your garden alone for 50 years and see what happens. Excess timber will come out of the forest, and it comes out in only two ways. Either we will carry it out, or nature will burn it out. Nature doesn't care that it takes centuries for a forest to return. We mortals do. That's why we set up these land agencies, to remove excess timber before it could choke off the forest or be consumed by fire. Every year, foresters would mark off surplus timber. We would auction it off to logging companies who then paid us to remove it. 25% of those revenues from federal timber auctions went to local communities like Mariposa, and the other 75% went back into our forests. For a century, we enjoyed healthy, fire-resistant, and resilient national forests and thriving local economies as well. But then in the 1970s, we passed laws like NEPA and ESA that have made the active management of our forests endlessly time-consuming and ultimately cost-prohibitive. A simple forest management plan now takes an average of 4.5 years to complete. The environmental studies now exceed 800 pages. They cost millions of dollars, more than the value of the timber to be harvested. So it shouldn't surprise us, in those years, timber harvested off the federal lands have dropped 80%. And with the federal timber supply cut off, the number of mills has shrunk from 149 in 1981 to just 39 today. And so nature has returned to remove the excess timber by burning it out. The acreage destroyed by catastrophic fire in California has exploded from 250,000 acres a year throughout the 20th century to 4 million acres last year. Now, these laws were imposed with the promise that they'd improve the forest environment. I think after 50 years, we're entitled to ask how the forest environment is doing. Well, we were able to get a categorical exclusion from NEPA for forest thinning projects in the Tahoe Basin. In the 7 years since its enactment, it's reduced the study time from 4.5 years to just 4 months. It's reduced the environmental reports from more than 800 pages to just a few dozen. Timber harvested has increased from roughly 1 million board feet a year in Tahoe to 9 million board feet on average. The treated acreage in the Tahoe Basin has tripled, and the forests are returning to fire resiliency. This saved the city of South Lake Tahoe from the Caldor fire just 2 years ago. The Save Our Sequoias bill would employ the same reform to protect our sequoia stands. My bill, H.R. 188, would extend this proven reform throughout the federal lands. Both have been marked up by this committee, but they still await a vote on the House floor. I agree this should not be a partisan issue. The question is between policies that have proven to work and policies that have proven to fail. John Muir once said that when people visit Yosemite, they may arrive as tourists, but they leave as evangelists. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for coming to Yosemite today. Now let us all go forth from this hearing determined to evangelize to save our forests.